This wasn't just a trade. This was a fracture. A rising star in the Chicago sky, young, dominant, and utterly impossible to ignore, was suddenly moved for a return that simply didn't match the resume, the hype, or the on-court impact. When Angel Reese landed with the Atlanta Dream, the mainstream headlines focused on the potential for Chicago's rebuild and Atlanta's new powerhouse. But the whispers inside the league told a much darker, much more complicated story. Because beneath the highlight reels, the rebounding records and the magazine covers, there were cracks. Quiet at first, a suspension that raised eyebrows, teammates who stopped seeing eye to eye, a highly publicized rivalry with Caitlin Clark that blurred the delicate line between fierce competition and unnecessary controversy. And then came the question that no one in the basketball world could ignore anymore. What if this was never really about talent? What if this was about everything else that comes with it? Because when a professional franchise decides to walk away from a player this valuable, they aren't just changing their roster direction. They are sending a message. Chapter 1. The Warning Shot. People keep pointing to the official trade announcement as the exact moment Chicago turned the page on Angel Reese. But that is not where this story starts. The real fracture, the moment the foundation cracked, happened months earlier, in September. It started with a half-game suspension that barely made national headlines at the time, but looking back, it reads like a warning shot that everyone, especially Reese, should have taken much more seriously. Here is exactly what happened. Reese sat down with the Chicago Tribune and told reporters, clearly and on the record, that the Sky needed to go out and get great players. She didn't suggest it, she called it non-negotiable for her to stay. Now, let me be very clear about what she did not do. She did not raise this concern in a private, closed-door meeting with the front office. She did not bring it up in a team huddle. She didn't pull the head coach aside after a grueling practice. She went directly to the press. She essentially told the organization, publicly, that the roster standing next to her was not good enough for her. Look, you can agree with the sentiment. Maybe Chicago did need better talent. But there is a massive difference between believing something privately and broadcasting it in a way that puts your own front office and teammates on blast in front of the entire WNBA. Think about it from the perspective of the other women in that locker room. You show up to practice the next morning, you open your phone, and you see your own teammate telling the world that you are the problem. How does that sit with you? How does that change the energy when she calls for the ball? Chicago responded by benching her for half a game and attaching 4 specific words to the decision that changed everything. Detrimental to the team. Organizations do not use that specific language lightly. That is paper trail language. That is the wording a front office uses when they are building a legal and professional case, not just reacting to a bad afternoon. You do not suspend your own all-star over a single quote unless the relationship is already damaged beyond the point of repair. And here is the part that made it unforgivable. After the suspension, when it was time for Reese to check back in for the second half, reports say she refused to go in. Let that sink in. She refused to play. That is not a player disagreeing with a decision. That is a player deciding the organization no longer deserves her cooperation. Chapter 2. The Locker Room Collapse. If the suspension was the public turning point, the teammate situations were the private disasters that made the trade inevitable. There were 2 relationships that completely collapsed. The first involved a Chicago legend, Courtney Vandersloot. If you don't follow the WNBA closely, let me give you the resume. Vandersloot is a 2-time champion, a 5-time All-Star, and a 2-time All-WNBA first-team selection. She won a ring in Chicago in 2021, went to New York, won another, and then, at 36 years old, chose to come back to Chicago. She left a championship-caliber team to return to a rebuilding franchise because she believed in the city. Then, just 7 games into the 2025 season, Vandersloot tore her ACL against the Indiana Fever. In any functional locker room, the code is simple. You rally around the injured veteran. You keep it respectful. Angel Reese did not follow the code. In a September interview, Reese went on the record saying the team could not rely on Courtney to come back at her age, stating they needed someone younger to compete for a championship. Think about how that sounds to a 36-year-old champion sitting at home, rehabbing a devastating injury. That isn't constructive criticism. That is a rookie telling the world a legend is finished. Behind the scenes, the relationship was entirely shattered. But the situation with Camila Cardoso was arguably worse. Cardoso wasn't a distant veteran. She was Reese's front-court partner. They were drafted together in the 2024 class. Cardoso at number 3, Reese at number 7. They were supposed to be the twin towers of Chicago's future. Except the pairing was a tactical disaster. Statistically, the Cardoso-Reese tandem posted the worst defensive rating of any two-big combination in the league. When both were on the floor, Chicago shot a miserable 28% from 3. The paint was entirely clogged, because neither player could shoot from the outside. But it wasn't just basketball. Sources inside the building reported Cardoso had actively distanced herself from Reese. There is a viral clip from a game against New York where Cardoso is visibly checked out, literally walking away from her own team's huddle. When the same friction shows up in every locker room you walk into, from Maryland to LSU to the WNBA, the common denominator stops being the locker room. It becomes you. Chapter 3. The Reality Gap and Caitlin Clark. No conversation about Angel Reese is complete without Caitlin Clark. This isn't about the college rivalry or the draft. What matters here are the on-court incidents during the 2024 and 2025 seasons that drew league-wide attention, and how they widened the gap between what Reese said publicly and what the video footage actually proved. There is a difference between playing physical and playing reckless. And there is a massive difference between playing reckless and then pretending you didn't do it. Especially when the footage lives on the internet forever. Multiple plays across 2 seasons were flagged by the league. Every time, Reese's public version of events did not match the replays. Take the 2025 season opener against Indiana. Reese and Clark got tangled up. Offsetting technical fouls, normal basketball. But after the game, Reese publicly framed the entire incident as discrimination. That pivot reportedly caught her own teammates completely off guard. The video showed Reese pulling Clark's jersey, getting physical well beyond the whistle. Conversations about race and fairness in women's sports are deeply important. They deserve genuine attention. But when you use that framing in a moment where your own teammates are looking at each other sideways because they do not agree with your version of reality, you aren't starting a dialogue. You are burning your own credibility. And inside Chicago's locker room, that trust fractured completely. Reese was pouring gasoline on a rivalry, and the splash damage was hitting everyone standing next to her. Chapter 4. The twerking video and the exit. By the time the late-season absences started piling up, with Reese citing a back injury, Chicago's front office had mentally packed her bags. The timing of her missed games lined up perfectly with the stretches where internal accountability conversations were at their peak. And then the video surfaced. Reese, on a private jet, headed to Las Vegas, twerking, having the time of her life, all while supposedly too injured to suit up for her struggling team. Back injuries are complicated, yes, they flare up. But optics are everything in professional sports. When your teammates are grinding through pain to fight for a playoff spot, and you are posting private jet videos, it turns locker room whispers into megaphones. Chicago had to make a choice, and they chose Camila Cardoso. The front office looked at both players and decided that a younger center who fits their spacing system and who doesn't create a media circus every 3 weeks was worth more than a league-leading rebounder. Let's talk about her game for a second. Reese's rebounding numbers are undeniable, but her shooting range is non-existent. Defenses pack the paint and dare her to shoot. A massive chunk of her offensive production comes from missing her own point-blank layups and grabbing the rebounds. The coaching staff even tried running her at point forward, a decision analysts called a complete circus. It was a desperate attempt to make a square peg fit a round hole.
Chapter 5. Delusion versus the market. Chicago moved her for a return that the entire basketball world called completely underwhelming. 2 late first-round picks in 2027 and 2028. A team with leverage doesn't accept that trade for a 23-year-old all-star. A team that desperately needs a problem solved yesterday takes that deal and doesn't look back. When the trade dropped, Reese was on social media within minutes. Pictures in an Atlanta Dream jersey, captions about Barbie dream houses. It was highly curated, polished. But behind the scenes, reports surfaced that she was furious. She reportedly told people close to her that she is worth more than the entire Chicago Sky franchise. Not worth more than the draft picks. Worth more than the whole organization. And in a way, the marketplace agreed with her ego. Within 1 hour of Atlanta putting her number 5 jersey on sale, it sold out in every size. Ticket prices for the Dream's home opener spiked from $38 to $68. Average home game prices jumped to $255. Atlanta gained 20,000 Instagram followers in 2 days. The Angel Reese effect is a very real, very lucrative business. But there is a difference between confidence and delusion, and the line between them is reality. Marketplace energy does not play defense against a pick and roll. Jersey sales do not fix spacing issues in the paint. Atlanta just signed up for all of it. The dominance on the glass, the sold-out arenas, and the inevitable internal friction. The move has been made. The pieces are on the board. In Atlanta, the belief is loud, but the uncertainty is deafening. Because waiting on the other side of the court is Caitlin Clark and the Rising Machine in Indiana, a system that doesn't hesitate, doesn't slow down, and brutally punishes mismatches. At the center of it all stands Angel Reese, a talent that is undeniable, a presence that is unavoidable, and a variable that no team has fully solved. This isn't just about basketball fit anymore. It's about identity, control, and ego. Because when raw potential collides with unrelenting pressure, something always has to give. The only question left is, when it finally does, will it break the Atlanta system, or will it finally reveal what Angel Reese was built to become?